qualifications for Medicare. Those are things that have been discussed. I mean, if we're going to go forward and change the system so that we save the system, as Senator Lieberman said, he said, in order to save Medicare, we've got to reform it. And that's what we're talking about. But I'm one of those who made the decision that in all of those efforts, we would say that if you're 55 and older, you would have the same system. You would not be confronted with a change, but for those people who are under that, we would have to have some changes going forward, because otherwise the system just wouldn't exist. On energy, look, I support alternative sources of energy, but I'm just going to be frank with you. We will be dependent on fossil fuels for probably the rest of my lifetime. That happens to be a fact. We are probably the country right now with the greatest potential for resource recovery of fossil fuels in the entire world. When you look at the natural gas that's available to us, the petroleum that's available to us in different forms, with the new technology and the new finds that are being made, we are burdening ourselves with the restrictions that do not allow ourselves to develop that. And frankly, if I were an enemy of the United States and I wanted to hobble the United States economically, I would do everything I could to ensure that the United States couldn't develop their own resources. Only then we'd call it an act of war. What we do now is we call it an act of political policy, and I think it's dumb. I will just tell you, I do not and have not questioned the President's citizenship. I have not seen any evidence, and I know the sheriff has come forward with some things that he believes are the case. Well, take it to court. That's how we solve things in this country. You take it to a court to make a determination if you have a legal claim. Look, the President said many times in conversation with those of us on the other side of the aisle, you guys have to understand, elections have consequences. I mean, he says that to us when he disagrees with us and he supports his position and rejects ours. That's the way you change things in this country. Elections have consequences. If you disagree with the President, you have a chance to register your vote in November. And frankly, I disagree with the President. That's how I'll do it. I just have not bought into the issue of questioning his citizenship, even though I don't question anybody's genuine belief in that. Foreign exchange programs. When I was a kid growing up, we had an exchange student from Chile. I thought it was a great experience for my brothers and my sisters and I. We had 7 kids in our family. We brought an 8th in as a student for a year. It was a great experience. My daughter was a exchange student in, as they say, Barcelona, Spain, and it was a great experience for her. I just met 2 days ago with a German exchange student in a program that is sponsored by the Congress and the Bundestag. Frankly, I think that is a great thing. If you go back in history, not too distant history, President Eisenhower was one of those who believed that one of the ways that we could reduce conflict in this world would be to have young people exchange experiences country to country. And you have to understand, Eisenhower is one of my heroes. I think he's one of the great heroes of the last century. He doesn't get his due. And he saw the horrors of war. I mean, one of the great things he did a lot of great things in the war, including commanding the greatest armada in the history of the world, and coming across Europe in a very short period of time and defeating the Nazi war machine. But remember what happened when we were confronted with the reality of the concentration camps. He required the residents of the communities outside that to go in and to see what they had claimed didn't exist. He had us film that so that the naysayers in future generations would be disproven. He wanted the world to know the horrors of war and the specific Holocaust that existed. He was a great man in many ways. That is one of his great contributions. He believed that exchange of young people from countries around the world would be to our benefit and would lead to a more peaceful world. I think he was correct on that. What is $1 trillion? It is 1,000 billion, or another way to say it is a million. That's a huge amount of money. And it just, comes across the tongue too easily these days. And I think we better understand what it is. Let's see. Obstructionist Congress. I don't accept that argument. I happen to believe that the way our process works is you should be forced to say what you believe at the time you run for office. People should be able to vote for whom they wish based on who they think would be best in office, and then people have a right to expect that people who are elected to office will do what they say they did when they were running for office. And to do that, and then people say you're obstructionist, means they want me or anybody else to turn my back on the folks that elected me and say, I didn't mean what I said when I was out there running for office. Now, within that area, within areas of disagreement, I think we should work to try and find some common ground, as long as I don't compromise principle. That's why I work very closely with the administration on cybersecurity. I don't think that's a partisan issue. There are a lot of disagreements on that, but it's not partisan. It's not by political philosophy. It's by what you think actually works and how it works. And I think that's extremely important for us to understand. Let's see. Someone said taxes are not evil. No, I don't think taxes are evil, but let's understand what taxes are. Taxes are the involuntary taking of money from your pocket by the force of government. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because we've agreed as a country that we expect a certain level of government. You got to pay for that government. That's called taxes. But it just seems to me my obligation is to find the level of taxes that's at the least amount, that intrudes the least on your life, so that in fact you will make decisions based on what's best for you and your family. If you're a businessman or woman, based on what you think is the best for your business, the best for your workers, the best for the services and products that you produce for people, as opposed to trying to figure out some tax scheme. Look, I want to get rid of as many deductions and exceptions and distortions of the system in the area of corporations as well as individuals. Bring the rates down, and that's the way you get out of people not paying their taxes. Guess what? It's a lot easier for the rich not to pay their taxes than the poor, because they can afford the attorneys and the accountants. And the only reason that that is the way it is because prior Congresses and presidents have set up all these unique, discrete little things because Congress and presidents think that we ought to tell you how you ought to act, and we don't think you'd act that way unless we force you to do it by way of our taxes. I think that's gotten out of hand. With the idea of we ought not to have large bills that have a lot of different things in them, I don't think that would actually work in terms of the size of the country and the size of various projects. What would work, it seems to me, is to require that anything that goes into a spending bill has to be considered in open by the subcommittee, by the committee, has to be voted on, and then any member has a right to have an amendment considered on the floor to knock any one of those things out. And then, and if you actually look at what's happened in appropriation bills over the last year and a half with the Speaker Boehner setting essentially the direction for our Congress, we've had more amendments on appropriation bills than we have ever had, at least in the last 30 years. And what that means is members get a shot at voting down projects, taking them out, cutting spending. And every member has a right to do that. We've never been able to do that before. It's called an open rule. It makes it more difficult to get a bill passed, but frankly, I think that's the way you get away from these exceptions. Last thing we ought to do is no longer have what are called airdrops. What's an airdrop? Well, we passed an appropriation bill in the House. They passed a different version of the bill in the Senate. It has to go to what we call a conference. They work out the differences. All of a sudden, a bill comes back to you, and they just didn't work out the differences. You have hundreds or maybe thousands of new programs, new earmarks that no one ever saw before except those who were in the conference. And those are called airdropped in. We have adopted a rule on the House side that we will not accept any airdrops now. I mean, those are the kinds of things, it seems to me, that we ought to do to repeal. Someone said we ought to cut the government by 10%. If you look at the numbers here, Congress has cut itself by 22%. I'm responsible for part of that. I'm chairman of the House Administration Committee. We're the ones that set the budgets for House members, for committees, even for our leadership. And I brought on the floor last year a bill that cut everybody, all those categories by 5%. I brought another bill this year on the floor that was adopted that cut it by 6.3 or 6.4%. And I actually cut my own committee by more than I cut the other committees. So we thought that we ought to set an example. And if the rest of the federal government had followed the Congress, yeah, we'd be, well, we wouldn't be closing the deficit entirely, but we'd be coming pretty close. Well, we'd cut half of it there because we did it by 22%. So we have tried to lead by example. Look, the fellow that has been charged with those killings of civilians in Afghanistan ought to have a fair trial, and he ought to be given the opportunity to defend himself like anybody else would. But we ought to have the facts determine what should happen to him. I don't know the facts there, yet the result was a gruesome killing of civilians. I had no idea what his mental state was. I have no idea if he had brain damage. I have no idea on any of those things. But frankly, he ought to go before the system of military justice, which has been established, by which every soldier, sailor, Marine, airman knows that they will be judged. And that's what we ought to do. No exceptions. You know, you will be judged by the rules that have been established at the time that you came in, and you know what those are. And I understand the concern people have for post-traumatic stress syndrome and being in the war zone, and also the terrible situation we're having with suicides among our returning veterans. I've tried to work hard on allowing additional modalities of treatment for soldiers. We've got some of those actually in action right now with our veterans, and I will continue to work with that. That's about as many of the questions as I can get to in the time, since we are over by a half hour, and we are exceeding our time here, and I appreciate the city for allowing us to use their resources, their employees who are here, our law enforcement folks who are here. I want to thank all of you for being here. If you have any further comments, you can leave with my staff, you can call our office, you can visit our website. We will try and answer and work with you as best we can. And for those of you who may have mentioned a specific case that you have that is dealing with your own particular circumstances, we'll be happy to work with you on those as well. So thank you very much for being here. God bless you, and God bless this country.
Good luck there. Thank you. Appreciate it.